Welcome to Round Hill Radio, the podcast from Round Hill Community Church. Through our conversations, we discover the holy and the ordinary, find moments of grace and peace, and redefine what we're talking about when we talk about faith. Good morning, Ed.
Good morning, Leslie.
How you doing?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
Oh, good. I'm excited today because we are, We are bringing back a series we did last year, all about our favorite Advent and Christmas hymns.
Love it.
This was a big hit. I think our O Little Town of Bethlehem is one of our top 4 performing
Is that right?
podcast episodes. Yes.
Let's see if we can exceed it.
So hopefully we're giving the people what they want. We love you guys. We want to give the people what they want.
Give the people what
Give
they
the people
want.
what they want. So I figured it would be nice to start. I got some new hymn storybooks. Of course, I left them at home. And I thought it'd be nice to talk about the hymn we sang yesterday in worship, which was different than the online service. If you're an online service person, you heard People Look East. But in worship, in person in the sanctuary yesterday, we sang Come Thou Long Expected Jesus, which in the Chalice hymnal is set to the tune Hifferdal. So I thought we'd start with that. And then the next couple of weeks, we'll go into sort of Christmassy hymns. But I think it's nice to start with a little Advent moment.
I love it. And I think it always kind of comes as news, no matter how long people have been associated with the church, that there are actually hymns for Advent.
A lot of them.
Right? A lot of them.
Really good ones, I think.
Some beautiful hymns. And we might call them more reflective and contemplative, but they have a robustness that's unique to them.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting too, looking at sort of just the whole library of Advent hymns, because you get kind of a couple of different language focuses, because you get not only waiting for the birth of Jesus, but you also get this waiting for sort of a new heaven, a new earth kind of language. So there's sort of waiting for what some people might call the second coming or whatever. So you get kind of this double language. So I find the poetry in Advent hymns to be quite layered and complex, because they kind of tend to tackle a lot.
Right.
Versus Christmas hymns, which tend to be like, there's a baby. Right.
It's pretty straightforward.
It's pretty straightforward. Yeah.
I know.
But the contrast is nice too.
Yeah, that's great. So to your point, right, all those Christmas carols, there's a baby being born into the world. And we think, well, okay, if we can't understand much else of what's going on, theologically, right? We've got that human experience that's right there, right in front of us. Right. Which is wonderful. But I love the way that you frame this in terms of Advent as a time when we're also talking about birth, but it's not the same kind of birth. I remember one of the confirmation students that I had in a class many, many years ago was doing a special project. I think it was for an Eagle Scout badge. It was a religion badge or something. So he came to me, we're having this conversation, and he asked me about the second coming of Jesus. It's probably one of 5 times in my life when someone has asked me that question. And I asked him, I said, well, what do you think about that? And in that particular congregation, we always used a phrase at communion. We would all say together, Christ has died, Christ is risen, Christ will come again. So I said, well, what do you think that means? And he said, I think Christ is always coming again. That every time there's a decision made in the world for life, love, justice, Jesus has come again. And that's not the same understanding that everybody has of the second coming, right? When there's this kind of global reordering of things, it's almost like the fulfillment of time. And many Christian people across the world, for them, that's a very important image. Right. So anyway, but Advent picks up those notions of that dream that one day it's all going to make sense. All the wrongs will be righted. And that is a very powerful dream. And it's Advent in particular where that gets emphasized.
Yeah. And then so looking at this hymn, so friendly reminder, when we talk about hymn, we're talking about the text, and then we're talking about the tune. We're talking about the tune because to expand upon that. So hymns are often written separate of a tune. There's sort of standard poetic structure, and then a tune is either written for that text or is sort of found and already exists. and maybe is set to the same thing. For instance, for Hiferdal, I think of sort of as one of the sort of evergreen tunes because it's used for a ton of stuff. Like,
Right.
I think we more in my experience, I've more often played it with the text "Alleluia, sing to Jesus" than I have to "Come Thou Long Expected Jesus."
Right.
So you sort of get sort of, ordinary time texts, and then you have this Advent text.
Yeah. And we've talked before about the way in which the tune shapes our understanding of the hymn.
Totally.
And I think that would be especially true of this "Come Thou Long Expected Jesus." It can be played in one way that almost sounds like it's sort of a triumphant march.
Yeah.
And then I always think about Hiferdal as this beautiful flowing tune.
Yeah.
It just feels, to me, it feels very sweet and soft in a sense.
Yeah. Well, apparently the translation of the word Hiferdal, it's Welsh.
Yes.
The translation means delightful, agreeable, pleasing, pleasant, beautiful, fair, fine, sweet, and melodious.
Can't get better than that.
I mean, I would say almost 2 on the nose.
Right, exactly. Well, here, true confession, it's my favorite hymn tune.
Is it your favorite hymn tune?
I love it.
Very
Absolutely
good.
love it.
Very good.
And it works beautifully, right, with this hymn.
Yes. And so apparently, this was composed by Rowland Pritchard. Rowland. There's a W in there. And he actually wrote it when he was like 19.
Oh my goodness!
In 1844.
Sort of an inspirational moment, maybe early
really
in his
cool,
life.
Right? Yeah, absolutely. So this was the tune. As far as I can tell, was actually written like 100 years later from the original text.
That's right.
So I want to know what
gap.
original tune they sang it to too.
Right.
Because I don't think that's written in our handy dandy hymn story.
Yeah. No, that's not. Yeah, because this has the date of 1744. Right. So just a little quick aside, we were talking earlier about this television series on PBS called Poldark.
Yeah.
Right. The story of a Cornish man who's he's a fascinating, many-sided character. And so Susan and I have been watching through the series, but there's a point in the series at which some really interesting information is provided about Methodists who begin to move into Cornwall, I think, in the late 1700s. And of course, that's because of Wesley, Charles and John Wesley, the brothers. And they were amazingly prolific hymn writers.
Yeah,
right.
They're all over.
So who knows what the tune was that was used initially for this. But one of the things that we notice in Poldark is that open air singing really gave such power to Methodists. That's what really attracted people. Their lives were miserable in a lot of ways. So to be able to go out and sing was so important for them. So I just imagine these, individuals in Cornwall singing "Come Thou Long Expected Jesus" in the midst of very, very challenging times, and how that might have given them hope that one day, the world would finally find itself on an even plane.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, so this text was written by, I guess the Wesleys. I think it's attributed to Charles.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's very interesting how how the experience of that shapes the text.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I loved the background that you provided from the book that you had used to get some background material for this. And interestingly enough, Wesley had created a 2-volume collection of hymns and sacred poems. So he was prolific, right, to say the least. Yeah. And interestingly enough, "Come Thou Long Expected Jesus" wasn't actually in that collection, right? It came as in addition to that.
It didn't make the cut.
Didn't make the cut, but he sold those volumes sold well enough that he was able to use the royalties to convince his future father-in-law that he could provide for his bride-to-be.
Always good. I like that. I guess his main purpose. He was like, "Ta-da! Look, yeah. I'm useful."
Talk about leveraging your gifts.
Priorities.
Right. I'm going to build a church, but more importantly, I'm going to marry your daughter.
I'm going to marry this lovely lady,
and I can afford food on the table.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Because he was a hymn writer. And so it speaks to the popularity of religion and also to the popularity of singing.
Sure.
Right. And how important that was for people.
Well, they were big advocates of singing.
Yes.
Because they famously, or at least famous to me, have in the big opening pages of the Methodist hymnal, like instructions for singing.
Right.
And I think my favorite one, I think, is to sing, what is it? Lustfully and with good cheer.
That's right.
They're like, sing. You don't have to be perfect. Just sing. But I really like that.
Isn't that nice?
I think it's nice. Sing. You're not trying to, you're singing for you. You're not singing for other people.
Right.
You're singing for your faith.
And isn't it pretty incredible that it's 2021? We sang this hymn yesterday. So there we are, all the way from 1744. This hymn has followed, has woven like a thread through all of those years. We're still singing it.
Yeah.
And, it's interesting. In Poldark, sometimes they will show people singing without any book in front of them because they just know it by heart.
Mm-hmm.
They were just gathering those songs into their lives, right into the memory banks. And so it's really special to come across something like this and think about it, how it's still forming faith for today.
Well, for sure. I mean, if you see an early hymnal, they look nothing like our hymnals now. Like the music and the text are not together.
Right.
Either you'll get just a book of texts, or you'll get like text over here and music over here.
Right.
Like in the old English hymnal, that little green one.
Yes.
Which I think is very cool.
And I think you were saying this earlier, that in many cases, like Come Thou Long Expected Jesus, you wouldn't have to use just one hymn tune, right? You could mix it up.
Yeah.
And I used to love when I lived in Scotland for a time and worshiped in a Church of Scotland congregation. And they used to have these hymnals that had split pages. So the text was on the top, and the melody lines were below. So the hymn tunes, so that someone could say, "We're going to sing hymn number 35 to the tune, whatever that was, Hifredal."
Mm-hmm.
But the next Sunday, you could sing hymn 35 to the tune Regent Square.
Right.
And again, you'd get such a different flavor from that.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to love the fact that they knew the hymns as well as the tune names.
Right.
Which seems incredible.
Right. Because it's just not part of our current education. Yeah. It also puts me in mind of the old Lutheran tradition, which is that the organist would play the melody. I mean, when I say slow, I mean like each note it lasts like multiple seconds.
Wow.
Right?
Yep.
And so it's less of an experience of a tune as a note to a note to a note to a note. And you would have your text and they would introduce it, and then they would play the first note. You'd be like, oh, that's the note. And then you would join in. And then they would change the note, and it would be like, doom, boom, doom, boom. And they would kind of like catch up in the stair-step way, which is why, I mean, not that exact reason why, but if you see Lutheran churches, most often the organ is in the back.
Right.
And is sort of like part of the singing.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
It's sort of like supporting, sort of behind
underneath
and supporting. Versus sort of like we worship the organ kind of look that you see other places, that's very like
front and center, that's leading versus sort of driving, right? If you will. Fascinating. This whole theological thing about organ placement, but but I had, and I had an experience. My first little baby tiny church job was subbing for a lovely woman in Atlanta as a teenager. So I had to learn how to play hymns. I'd been taught to play all this like really fancy organ repertoire, and then I was like, how do you? A whole different creature. It's a whole different creature. So that was such a gift that she let this like little snarky 17-year-old play hymns. I can't believe you were a snarky 17-year-old. I'm pretty sure I was pretty snarky. Okay. Yeah, that's okay. It's fine. It mostly wore off. But like, and it was I forgot the name. Every time we play this hymn in church, I'm like, this was my first hymn, and now I've forgotten. It's like a I'll think of it. I'm sure, like during our live stream, of course, in 15 minutes, I'll be like, that's what it was. But it's such a cool thing, just looking at him playing, him singing, and just talking about it. I just think it's so much fun. Yeah. Yeah. So thank you all for joining us today, and we look forward so much to talking with you more this month about our favorite Christmas carols. Amen. Amen. Bye, everybody. Thanks for listening. Round Hill Radio is brought to you by the friends and members of Round Hill Community Church.